Now, the very last thing I want to show you before I wrap up this series, because this is all the basics, you should have a good understanding of how state trees work, and how you can use them. They can get extremely complex, but for now, this will get you through the basics so that you can do other tutorials. I wanted to show you how, in some cases, you might have something specific to the weighted platform that you need a task for, and I want to show you how you could do that. Best practice is to try and make your tasks modular so you can reuse them, but there will eventually come a case where you want to do something weighted platform specific or some other blueprint specific task, and I want to show you how you could accomplish that. So for this, if it is specific to the weighted platform, I am going to put this task inside of our weighted platform. And I'm actually not going to make this task complicated. I'm just going to trigger a debug message just so that you can see how you could do it. It might happen eventually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a custom event here inside of my weighted platform. So we'll say add custom event. We'll call this hit sync bottom. All right, so in this case, I'm just going to print a message. So pull off print string, and we'll say we sunk to the bottom. So maybe in this case, you want to do special things when you hit the bottom. Maybe you want to deactivate it. Maybe you want to trigger some particular animation, whatever. If it is specific to the weighted platform, you could make a specific task for that. And as long as we can hit this custom event and see this message, then we can prove that we can do it if we want. So we're going to try to run this function from a task. So to do this, I'm going to go to my weighted platform. I'm going to right click. We're going to make a blueprint class just like we normally do. Our state tree task blueprint STT. Now in the naming for this, I'm going to put the name that this task is associated with. So weighted platform. And then I'm going to put what it does. I think this one is just calling a function. So we'll say hit sync bottom. All right, so a little bit wordier, but now it's more specific to what it's doing. I like to communicate the intent and whenever I'm naming something. So this is specific to the weighted platform. So let's open it up. And the main thing to know here is if you hit your variable, I'm going to make my context more specific to the weighted platform. So you saw before when we did our actor, right? We did our actor context and we tried to pull off of it. We can't really get weighted platform specific things, right? We can cast, but I don't really like doing that. So it's generic to actor and that's fine. But for this particular task, we do want it to be specific to the context. So in this case, I'm going to name it weighted platform and the type is going to be weighted platform. So BP weighted platform. So we're looking for a reference to our weighted platform. And I'm also going to add context to it. The category. Now, because our context in our state tree is defined as weighted platform, right? Context actor class, that in this specific task, when we mark context, we can use the specific type right here, right? Because it is marked right here. If this matches, then we can get weighted platform specific things. So actually, let's do our enter state. And instead of casting, we can just assume that we have a weighted platform and we can do weighted platform specific things because it matches our context for this task. So let's do our weighted platform, pull off, hit sync bottom, right? We can run this event that is specific to this weighted platform because our context will match and it automatically gets assigned, right? Compile, save. So if this matches our task, then we can run a task specific to this blueprint over here. So that's kind of how you'd set it up. You just want to make sure that you assign your context to the specific actor that it's, the state tree is trying to use. And then you make sure that your task in the state tree matches your context. Kind of weird to explain, but this is how you can get more access to your weighted platform stuff as long as your type matches and you have it marked as context. Well, that's a lot. Let's actually prove that this works. So when we hit the bottom, I'm going to run my specific task. So task, see right here, weighted platform, hit sync bottom. So this lets me know that it's not generic. It is specific to our weighted platform. And because our context is defined up here, we shouldn't need to do anything. Compile, save. If this is working and we are actually running the task specific and calling this function, we should see this debug text. Compile, save. All right, let's hit play. And if we hit the bottom, let's look for that text. All right, we did it. The key point here is I wanted to show you how you could make tasks that are specific to a blueprint because you want to run functions on it or you want more access to its variables. You can put whatever logic you want here. I just put a debug text just to show you that we could hit this point in the code. But the main thing that I wanted to communicate is as long as your variable is marked for context and the type matches the context in the tree, then you don't need to do any kind of casting or whatever, which you certainly could, but you could just assume that we have the correct one and then just do anything you want, like reference any functions over here on the actor that you're trying to get to. Just know, when possible, prefer global tasks, but if you want specific tasks, this is how you can associate it with an actor. So by now, we've covered all the basics, and I think I'm pretty much done with this mechanic. I really wanted to use it as an opportunity to learn more about how state trees work. And I think at this point, you're ready to do other tutorials that might go into more complex things. I did want to review all the things that we talked about, though. So when we're setting it up, I did want to remind you, we created a new actor. We added a component on the actor called a state tree component, which then referenced our state tree schema. This is our asset that we've been customizing, right? So we had to make that too. And this is where we've been doing most of our work. So inside of our schema, we talked about how we can assign a context actor class. We talked about how we can create all these different states and how to transition between them. We talked about the difference between context, which refers back to the owner of the state task, input, which means a required dependency in order to do the task's job. We talked about finishing a task sometimes, but not finishing the task in other places. We talked about exposing things with the output category so that other tasks can watch a particular variable or value. We also talked about different ways to optimize, like being able to use a delegate to trigger an event rather than listening to on tick. We talked about ways to delay and pause the state flow. So for example, we had a start sync that pauses for 0.3 and then continues. We talked about delaying transitions, which is another way to do it, but we talked about the differences and the pros and cons between using that versus a child state with more behavior. We also talked a lot about making different kinds of tasks that are modular that we can use in other state trees. That way we're not repeating our work. We just have generic movement or generic spawning particles or sounds. But we did talk about how we can make specific tasks to a particular blueprint where we can run a task that can assume information or functions on a blueprint and how we can set that up inside of our state tree. That is a summary of the things that we talked about and learned as we built this weighted platform mechanic. The last thing I want to mention is if you want to keep learning more about state trees, there's a lot of resources out there, but one of the best ways to learn is just to experiment. I do recommend opening up one of the variants of one of the game templates that Epic provides, going down and looking through some of their AI state trees. So for example, inside of the Arena template, which, hopefully this still exists by the time you're watching the video, you can open up a state tree. You can see they're using something like environmental queries. Like what is that? You can learn more about that. Tasks, you can look more about how they set up the AI. But if you open up the state tree asset, you should start to understand what's going on here. And maybe you can pick it apart knowing what you learned in this series, right? Like you can see how they color coded it. You can see they're using entrance conditions. You can see how they're doing their idle check at the bottom before they check a few other things. Like if our actor's HP is 0, then we're dead, right? Very similar to how we did the deactivated. You can see how they're making a decision on what to do. Should we attack? Should we investigate? How we are transitioning. There's just a lot you can learn by diving through existing state trees. And I hope that you can use the knowledge that you gained in these videos to start understanding how they're put together so that you can build your own. Eventually, you want to be able to customize your own state tree logic, whether it's AI or little mechanics. But that was my main goal of this series, is to prepare you for understanding state trees and other tutorials.